Hello, and welcome to the Dance Physio Podcast, a podcast designed to explore ideas and foster discussion around dancer health and wellness. We're here to challenge the status quo, bridge the gap between dance science and the studio, and help change the landscape of the dance industry for the better. I'm your host, Erika Mayall, a dancer turned physiotherapist who is deeply passionate about leaving the dance world better than I found it. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dance Physio Podcast. I am your host, Erika Mayall. Today, I want to recap the IADMS annual conference, which just concluded yesterday. I guess by the time you're listening to this, it concluded on Sunday, so 2 days ago. And just wanted to recap and share some of my highlights from this conference. I have done this previously, coming back from conferences, and a lot of people have really loved this type of episode style, especially if they weren't able to attend, to see what's current, what's going on, where current research is, things like that. So I thought I would do it right away, right while it is still fresh in my mind. I just got back yesterday, and so I've got lots of things swirling around in my mind. For those of you who are maybe unaware, if you haven't listened to previous episodes that are sort of on the similar topic, IADMS is the International Association for Dance Medicine and Science, and they host a conference annually that brings together some of the brightest minds, the people who are like intimately involved in the field of dance medicine and science, and brings everyone together in one place. So this year it was in Las Vegas. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but it does change locations every year. So they usually alternate between somewhere in North America and then somewhere kind of overseas. So next year it is in Australia, and the following year in 2027, it is actually in Canada. It's in Calgary, Alberta. So just so it's on your radar, but if you're not familiar with the organization, I highly recommend checking it out. They have fabulous resources online. It is an incredible community. I know I got to meet and chat with a lot of people who were at their first IADMS conference this year, and a lot of people were just like, I found my people. Like, I didn't realize there were so many other people who were as passionate about dancer health and wellness as I am. And I think that is the beauty of IADMS, and that really is what makes it so powerful. Yes, the sessions are great, and I'm going to talk more about those in a second, but really the community is what makes it so unique, because for those of us working in dancer health and wellness or dance medicine and science, sometimes it can feel a little bit like you're working in a bit of a silo. Depending on where you are in the world, there might not be a lot of other people who are doing the same thing. And so it can feel a bit lonely or a bit isolating. And then you get to one of these conferences, and there were over 600 people there in person this year. There was also people online virtually, but you arrive and it's just like overwhelming that there are 600 plus other people who are just as passionate and just as knowledgeable, if not more so, than you are. So it's a really incredible community and an incredible conference. So like I said, I just want to recap some of what went on. It was a bit overwhelming this year. I'm not going to lie. I always find it a little bit overstimulating. I am an introvert by nature, and so being around that many people and having that much like social interaction and social connection. And it's a lot of people I only get to see once a year. So you want to maximize that time. And, there's all the sessions, there's the networking, then there's people getting together for social events outside, and it can be a bit much. And normally, depending on the location of the conference, you can then kind of escape that and be like, okay, I'm going to go for a walk at lunchtime. I'm going to go sit outside or those types of things. But with it being in Las Vegas, there really wasn't a lot of escape from the overstimulation. Walking outside meant walking down the strip, which for any of you guys who have been to Vegas before know that that is also an overwhelming sensory experience in and of itself. So I did find that part of the conference a little bit hard this year, although there was amazing positives of being in a city that is so involved in arts and entertainment. We got to go see the RuPaul show, which was so fun. Highly recommend if you are ever in Vegas. It was just great. And we also got to experience some behind the scenes things with performers and healthcare staff and stuff that are actually like working in the field in Vegas. So people from Cirque shows and stuff like that. So it was a really great location from that perspective. But personally, I did find it a little bit overwhelming. I definitely sat in silence in my house for a solid like hour this morning, just listening to the rain outside because I needed a little bit of that decompression. But anyway, I am going to move on to talking about some of the highlights. So for me personally, one of my big highlights was getting to present with Astrid Sherman, who some of you might be aware of. She is an incredible ballet teacher who has been around the industry for a really long time. She was formerly based in Vancouver and now has most recently been working and living in LA, but is also based a little bit in Spain. Anyway, she is incredible. And she also happens to have been one of my ballet teachers when I was growing up. So she is South African. And when she first moved to Canada, she started teaching at the studio that I was at. And at the same time, she also started to do her degree in kinesiology. And so we had a Friday night ballet class. It was like advanced 2 ballet on a Friday night at, 8 p.m. or something. It was the worst like scheduled time slot. None of us were overly motivated to be doing syllabus ballet at that time on a Friday night. But Astrid always had these like labs that she had to complete for her kinesiology degree on things on motor learning and stuff like that. So we would get to like be her guinea pigs basically. So we would do all of these kind of kinesiology lab tasks and stuff. And that was actually one of my first introductions into kinesiology and one of my motivations for then going on and doing my undergrad in kinesiology before I got into physiotherapy. I always knew I was interested in physio, but that was kind of like that would be a really good undergrad for me in terms of my interests and strengths. So I always credit her to kind of introducing me to the field of kinesiology. And then we always joke about, I actually graduated with my kinesiology degree and I actually graduated with my physio degree, my master's, before she finished her kinesiology degree. Because she was teaching full time, she only really could do like one course per semester. So it took her a really long time to finish her degree. So it's a bit of our running joke. But she was also the one who encouraged me to really get involved in research, and we conducted some research studies together way back in the day. And we were actually the first to present together. The first time I ever presented at IADMS was with Astrid back in 2010. The conference was in Birmingham, England, at the Hippodrome, so the site of the Birmingham Royal Ballet. And Astrid convinced me to present. And so we, again this year, decided, and we've presented together over the years, and this year again, she approached me and said, hey, I really think that we should co-present a workshop on foot-specific stuff, but coming at it from a lens of a physio's perspective on why we care about these things, and then also the dance teacher's perspective from like a more aesthetic perspective. So we got to do a workshop together, which was fabulous. It's always so fun to present with her, and we always both learn a lot from each other in the process of preparing our presentations. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I'm actually going to do a podcast episode in a couple of weeks on the same topic we presented on. I'm going to try and like break it down and go over what we presented. So I'm not going to talk more about it right now, but that was certainly a highlight for me of getting to present with Astrid again, especially now that we don't live in the same city and we don't get to collaborate on projects as much as we did in the past. It was really, really fantastic to get to do that. So thank you, Astrid. In terms of, so I have 5 highlights that I'm going to run through in terms of sessions or takeaways and things like that. It is so hard to pick what the takeaways are, and I'm not sure that I've like fully processed and fully digested all the information and all of the content that was available at this conference. And the other thing I will say before I dive into sort of my top 5 is there are so many things happening at once. And this is amazing. And it's like a real sign of like the expansion of this field and how much the conference has grown since I first attended it in 2008. But there's often 5 or 6 sessions happening at once, and you obviously have to pick one to go to. And so I know that I missed a lot of really, really good content because all of my friends and colleagues were going to other things, and we compare notes and we talk about, oh my God, this was fabulous. But so these are sort of my caveat, I guess, is that these were highlights for me, knowing that this is only a really small fraction of what was available in terms of content at the conference. And really, this year felt like everything was really, really good. So, number one highlight for me, it felt like a little bit of a focus on the business aspect of things. And I don't remember in past years ever really attending sessions that looked at or talked about sort of the business side of things so much. And I think this is maybe a sign of us moving ahead a little bit in the field of dance medicine and science. And so I attended 2 sessions in particular. There were others as well, but I attended 2. One of them that was all about the anatomy of a contract, or that's what they called it, but it was all about how to build a contract as a healthcare professional who's offering services to a company, a touring show, a studio, whoever it is you're working at. How do we design that contract that it is beneficial for all parties involved and is meeting the needs of everyone involved? And so that was a really great session. I really appreciated that. And then there was another session that was all about using return on investment data to sort of promote, or just, I don't know if justify is the right word, but to like develop and promote performing arts medicine practices or performing arts medicine support within arts organizations. So really using the numbers and using the data to say, hey, this is why it'll be beneficial for you to have healthcare on site, or those types of things. And again, like I said, I don't remember there being a focus on business ever at IADMS, and certainly there could have been sessions, but I don't think I've ever attended any of them. And I think it was so beneficial to start to talk about these things. I think in the arts in general, and especially in dance, there's always been an undervaluing of dancers and dance and the arts. And we have not treated it enough like a business in the past. There's always been an element that's felt a bit like, well, the arts are, a bit of, I don't want to say charity, but a little bit like that, where because, and this is a societal issue, I think, because we undervalue arts in some ways. Like if we compare, say, dancers and what they are paid and how they are valued compared to a professional athlete, it is vastly different. And I think we are starting to see some change. We're starting to see some pushback. We're starting to see people try and take the dance world a little bit more seriously and actually value our dancers more. I don't know if any of you guys have watched the Netflix series on the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders, but like one of the things that came out of that was people being shocked at how little they were paid, but they have since received a 400+% increase in their wages just based on the fact that people recognize that like they were being underpaid and undervalued. So I think we're starting to see a shift in the dance industry in general in terms of actually hopefully starting to value dancers closer to where their worth actually is. And it was interesting to me to then see those conversations continue into the dance medicine and science side of things. So really making sure that if you are a healthcare provider working with dancers, that you aren't just doing it as an act of charity. And certainly, like, there are a lot of healthcare providers who provide a lot of free services to dancers and dance companies, and that is absolutely fine. But again, just making sure that you know what the benefit to you is, and making sure that we have contracts and safeguards and stuff in place. So that was kind of an interesting highlight for me that, like I said, was maybe new and not so much of a focus at past conferences. So I really enjoyed there being a lot of this discussion happening and a lot of the conversations that were happening behind the scenes, or like networking or just connecting with peers and colleagues, had a lot to do with like, how do we build sustainable models? Like we as healthcare providers or we as businesses, how do we build sustainable models to support these dancers in studios or in companies or in, even freelance dancers and things like that? Because us just like providing free services is not a sustainable model. And that's not to say that people aren't going to still do that, but we need to actually have better structures in place. So that was highlight number 1 for me. And these are in no particular order. Highlight number 2, I attended a session called Breaking the Binary, Expanding Gender Inclusivity in Ballet Training. And this was a highlight partly because the presenter was Anna Morgan. And if any of you guys follow her on Instagram, she's a bit, I would call her like a bit of an influencer on Instagram. And I've been kind of fangirling over her, following her for I don't know, forever, it feels like. And we've chatted back and forth in the DMs. And so the fact that I knew I was going to get to meet her in person in Vegas was very exciting for me. But beyond that, this session was incredible. It was she presented some of her PhD research, but then there was also a lot of opportunity for discussion within the room and people's experiences. And I'm not going to talk too much about this session right now because I am going to try really hard to get Anna on the podcast to tell us all about her research and exactly kind of what the session was about and expand on it a little bit. But all I will say is that this is a conversation that I feel like is long overdue in the ballet world. And I'm really hopeful that we will see progress in this regard moving forward. And I was so grateful for her to bring this forward to the IADMS community and be able to share this research and share her kind of ideas around this, because I do think that this is like the future of ballet training, or needs to be the future of ballet training. So that was a huge highlight. And like I said, I got to fangirl and meet her in person. So that was really fun. Next, there was some incredible sessions on sort of workload. And for any of you guys who have been around for any length of time on the podcast, you will know that workload and monitoring workload and workload management and all of those things is something that I talk about a lot and is something that I'm really, really interested in and really passionate. And so I was really glad to see there be a lot of exposure to even just things like monitoring or measuring workload in dancers, because again, like I talk about this a lot, but in reality, it's still not the norm in companies and, well, in any dance setting. It doesn't matter if it's a studio or a company or a college or whatever. We are not really monitoring dancers' workloads on a consistent or regular basis. So the fact that there was a whole bunch of research looking at this and looking at it in different populations. So like one study was looking at it in college dancers, one study was looking at it in professional ballet dancers. So we're seeing it across the board and seeing it show up in different areas was very exciting for me. I also think it's a great step forwards in terms of hopefully at some point in time having some established normative data. Because right now we can, I don't want to use the word guess, but that's essentially what we're doing. We can make educated guesses about what we think appropriate workloads are for dancers, but until we start to monitor consistently so that we can then start to collect a lot of data about it, we will then start to get normative values and be able to say, this is where dancers should be aiming to be in terms of their training load, workload, whatever you want to call it. One of the other sort of light bulb moments or things that I found so interesting from one of these workload monitoring presentations was actually not directly related to workload, but it kind of was. So this was a study that was done with, I want to say the Birmingham Royal Ballet. Maybe it was the English National Ballet. Anyway, it was in the UK. I should look it up. But they did a qualitative study. And for those of you who aren't super aware of different types of research, qualitative is where you essentially have conversations or like discussions with people, and those conversations are recorded. And then they were, in this case, they used AI for this, which I think was cool. But there is ways of then using, in this case, AI to pull out themes that they are gathering from these qualitative or these discussion-based interviews. So it's a little bit different than quantitative research where we're really looking at like numbers and data, and it would be like filling out like surveys with numbers involved and things like that. So these were conversations that they were able to have. And in this case, they were looking at workload monitoring, and they included all sorts of people within the company, which I think is really important. So not only did they include the dancers in this research, but they included all levels of artistic staff. And so they had, people like in more management level positions with the company. And then they included a lot of the health and performance staff as well. So they had sort of a broad range of people that were involved. And one of the things that came out of this study that I think, again, just like highlights something I've talked about before on the podcast that's so interesting is they were asking everybody who participated sort of what their perceptions of injuries were, or where they thought that injuries, like why injuries were happening, where the injuries were coming from. And the common themes that came out from the artistic staff, so people who worked more on the management side of the company, is that they were attributing injuries that were happening to things like poor technique or poor conditioning, like decreased conditioning on the part of the dancers. And all of the factors that they were kind of attributing these injuries to were really factors that were like intrinsic to the dancer itself. I don't think they were purposely being like, we're blaming the dancer for the injury, but they were all things that were intrinsic to a dancer. So, poor technique, or they weren't fit enough for the role, or whatever that was. But when they asked the same questions of the dancers attributed injuries to things like fatigue, or their schedules being too packed, aka like poor workload management, things like being under-recovered, not getting enough sleep, all of those types of things. So it was so interesting to me that we still see this disconnect of the dancers feeling like they're not in an environment that supports their ability to perform at their best and to recover well and to like be at their peak, where the people in decision-making positions and the management and the artistic staff is still sort of, and I use like air quote quotations, but like blaming the dancers or thinking that the factors that are contributing to the injuries are things that the dancer should be able to control, or the dancer should sort of, quote unquote, work harder on. So again, I've talked about this before in terms of this cultural shift we need to see happen, where if the people in management and decision-making positions aren't thinking a little bit more globally about the structures of their programs, that is hugely problematic, because we cannot leave it up to the most vulnerable people within the system to be the people who are trying to make changes, because no amount of, conditioning themselves or, having perfect technique and things like that is going to prevent an injury in a dancer who is overtrained and fatigued and can't recover and is in this sort of like energy deficit. So, like I said, I was really, really, really excited to see there be a lot of different presentations on monitoring workloads. But in particular, this really, really struck me. And I'm not sure that like this was not the primary aim of this particular study, but this qualitative study, because it's like they were able to have these conversations and interview these people, themes emerged that maybe weren't what their primary research question was, but I think are very, very telling as to some of what is going on within the dance world. All right, moving on to number 4. I attended a session that was all about vestibular training to improve dancers' turns. And this was Amy Warner and Sydney Newman, who are both based in Portland, Oregon. And Amy and I have been friends for years. We first connected online, I think years and years ago, but we have, met in person at these IADMS conferences many, many times now. And so she's always one of the people I look forward to seeing. And I know she always does great presentations. But this was, I think, the first time to my knowledge, but certainly the first time I've ever attended a session on vestibular training within an IADMS context, although maybe there's been some discussion about it in terms of like return from concussion and stuff like that. But this was really using vestibular practices. And for those of you guys who don't know what the vestibular system is, it is our inner ear system that contributes to our balance and our ability to sort of like know where our body is in space. And it is one of the things that kind of contributes to or can help control dizziness. And so especially when we have dancers who get really dizzy while they're turning, and, dancers where it may not be related to concussions or other things that can cause dizziness, it can just be from the vestibular system. We can actually train the vestibular system to become more efficient so that it does not cause so much dizziness and can actually help our dancers really improve in their turns. And so there are physical therapists and physiotherapists who specialize in vestibular therapy, and I am not one of them. So it's always been something that, although I learned very basic levels of vestibular therapy in my entry-level training, if I get people with vestibular issues in the clinic, I tend to refer them out to a vestibular specialist. But this session I thought was so great because it was really just using the basic vestibular principles, which I already know, as a way of actually like improving dancers' turns and challenging that system a little bit more to help improve balance and turning and things like that. So I just loved it because I thought it was something different that we haven't seen a lot of in the past, and something that's just like so easy to incorporate into kind of clinical practice for dancers who really are struggling. And especially, I know when I go to ballet, we turn a little bit, but most of the adults in the class, like, our tolerance for turning is much lower than what it was. And so we don't do as many turning exercises because everyone's like, okay, now I'm dizzy, I'm done, like I don't want to fall over or whatever. And so again, it was like, oh, this is really something we should be training, especially in some maybe more of our adult dancer populations. So I loved this session and will definitely be taking lots of this back into the clinic. So if you are a client and turning is one of the things we're working on in the clinic, be prepared. We are going to be including some of these vestibular things. I also was really dizzy after the session because sometimes if you're not using your vestibular system enough and we start to challenge it like this, it can be a little bit of a delicate balance to find that sort of that balance. And so it kind of just opened my eyes that I really need to be doing more of this in my day-to-day life as well. So that was also a little bit eye-opening. All right. And finally, my fifth kind of like highlight from the IADMS conference is actually like not a specific session that I went to, but I just was reflecting on how amazing it is to get to learn from some of the best and brightest within this field. There are people who, like I said, I sort of fangirl or I admire online, and people, some of which I've only known previously online, some of which I've met in person before. But the fact that we have access to learning from some of these people and then new people that I had never even heard of before, but who are absolutely brilliant teachers and educators. So I think it's just so special. So I did sessions with Alicia Head, who was an incredible ballet teacher who just has the most wonderful way of like cueing and just teaching and cueing in ways to get the activation and the recruitment that we're looking for in dancers' bodies. So she was like phenomenal to learn from. Jennifer Milner's always been like one of my highlights at conferences. Again, been friends for years. She's actually been a guest on the podcast before, but she's such a wonderful teacher as well. And so sessions with her are always great. I always take away little like pearls of information. This list is like endless. I'm not going to name everybody, but even people, Kim Cooper, who is at Decidedly Jazz Dance Works in Calgary, she did an incredible session with Sandro on sort of the fundamentals of jazz technique and how these can have an influence on strength and conditioning. And, you know, it was a jazz class, really. And I haven't done jazz in ages. It was so fun. And so just the ability and the opportunity to learn from so many incredible people, it really doesn't happen that often. A lot of these people, like I said, they are online and they have online offerings, but it is hard to take the opportunities and have the time to be able to access all of those things. So to have everybody in one place and be able to glean all of this knowledge from them is such a highlight for me. And it's so bucket filling. Like I said, it can feel a little bit like working in a bit of an isolated silo sometimes when you're one of the only people in your city sort of doing this stuff. And then you go to these events and all of a sudden it's like, oh no, this is my community. These are my people. And it really just fills your bucket and inspires me to then bring all of this back to my community. So those were some of my highlights. Like I said, I absolutely cannot highlight everything. It was a great 4 days, an overwhelming 4 days, but a great 4 days. And I am so, so, so grateful and thankful to everybody who took time to present at IADMS and share their ideas and share their thoughts. And then also for the people who were there for the first time and were just open and willing to learn and soaking up all of the knowledge. I met so many podcast listeners in person. It was incredible to get to have conversations with people who said, I listen to your podcast every day on my way to work and it's amazing. And, people from all over that I have never met before and had no idea that they were podcast listeners. So if you were one of them and we met at IADMS, thank you so much for coming up and introducing yourself and chatting. I really, really, really loved getting to know all of you and meeting so many new friends. So that is my little recap from IADMS from this year. If it is at all feasible for any of you to ever attend something like this in the future, I would highly encourage it. I really think it is so just soul-filling, bucket-filling, whatever you want to call it, to immerse yourself in like-minded people. There is nothing that beats the magic of being in the room. So I would encourage you to, if you ever do have opportunities to attend similar events, take advantage of them because they really are the best. So that is all I have for you today. If you have any questions or want to know more about these conferences, I am more than happy to answer questions. Like I said, I've been attending IADM since 2008, so I most likely probably can answer your question. Please reach out, more than happy to answer. And thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.